Hey guys, Jake Steele, Iron and Steel. This is podcast episode number 18. And as always, thank you very much for being here. It is greatly appreciated. And we'll just dive right into it. So in the last podcast at the end, we did a Q&A. One of the questions was basically, can you tell the story of the green Model A Coupe that you used to own? So that's what we're going to do today. When I was asked that question, it reminded me that that was the first story that I ever wrote for the website. So I went back, pulled it up. This was probably 5 or 6 years ago that I wrote this story and published it. So went back and looked at it, read through it. It's an extremely long story. It's more than 6,000 words. So I think what we're going to do is I'm going to read through the main portion of that story, kind of the genesis of how the car came to be, and then I think at the end I'll stop at some point, and then I'll kind of paraphrase the ending rather than read it verbatim off the site. So for anybody that doesn't know, this was a 31 Model A Coupe that I built, I don't know, 15 years ago or so. 5-inch chop, sat high, and just a bitchin' car. If you go to the website, which is ironandsteel.com, go to the very last page, you'll find the story. It's called Business and Pleasure, and you can see the car for yourself. The photos are Trent Sherrill's, and they're great, of course. So if anybody doesn't know what car it is that we're talking about, just head over to the site, go to the last page, and find the story called Business and Pleasure, and you can see for yourself firsthand. So speaking of the site, while you're there, ironandsteel.com, scroll to the bottom, hit the subscribe button, punch in your email. It takes 2 seconds, and you'll be, look, I'm going to send you an email once, maybe twice a week, just to let you know when there's fresh content, whether it's a new podcast or a new article or what have you. So if you could do that, it would be great. Just hit subscribe, punch in your email, and then you can be kept up to date on everything that's happening with Iron and Steel. So yeah, without further ado, let's just blast right through this story. Even the abbreviated version is a little bit long-winded, so I think we'll skip the Q&A for this episode. So I'll just set those aside, and then feel free to reach out in the meantime over the next week if you have any additional topics you want to cover for next week's podcast Q&A. So anyway, for now, kick back and relax, and I'll read you the story. Thanks again for being here. Okay, here we go. I'm going to try to do this all in one shot, so it's a little bit long-winded of a story. So if I stumble over some words, or you hear paper rustling in the background, or I accidentally say papal instead of paper, just fucking deal with it, all right? Okay, here we go. It was the spring of 2008, and I was living a pretty decent suburban existence. It was your typical scene. 9-to-5 job, 5-to-9 wife, a house, and a whole lot of dreaming about hot rods. It was the kind of thing that you would mostly expect from a 26-year-old guy with a whole bunch of ideas that were mostly bigger than his means. But I was getting by just fine, and even making a little progress on a Model A Coupe that I had bought as just a body a few months before from a local guy that I had met on the Jalopy Journal. Now, when I say progress, I mean that I had mostly acquired a few parts that I thought I would need to make the project a reality, and I had done a really great job of several mock-ups. In hindsight, it was a lofty goal for me at the time, and ultimately, that particular car would go down the road before it ever truly got off the ground. As did many others in that time frame. But anyway, one Sunday afternoon, I was doing some yard work at the house, daydreaming about hot rods, and dreading the work week that was about to kick off the next day. So, most people are able to enjoy their weekends. At the time, I tended to spend most of mine wading through the angst associated with the coming week and telling myself about all the bitchin' cars I was going to build with my hard-earned dollars to have it all seem worth it. This was the basic situation on this painfully typical Sunday. I pulled the mower out of the garage, finagled it past the coupe body and the 64 Chevy pickup that was perpetually clogging my driveway, and pulled it out to the lawn. After about 15 yanks on the cord, it was refusing to start up. And without much investigation as to why, I was fully convinced that it probably needed a new spark plug. Why? Because if it needed a new spark plug, that would mean I would have to go to the parts store and purchase one, which would mean I would no longer be doing yard work. Right? And besides that, the refreshment situation was reaching a critically low level. So, off I went. Driving to the closest auto parts store, I was thinking a lot more about that Model A Coupe project than I was the mower. I had conveniently taken the long way there, and, per usual, my mind wandered pretty deeply into the abyss of possibilities for that car. It went like this. Flathead powered? No. Banger powered. For now. Just buy a running and driving chassis, put the body on it, and drive it. No. A 32 frame and a nail head. No, fuck that, a flathead. Screw it. Early small block Chevy and just be done with it. No, that wouldn't be right. Yeah, of course it would. Fuck, this is hard. Alright, let's move on to the chop. 6 inches. No. 4. 4.5. No. 5. No. Well, maybe. What about the color? So this was the basic theme of the drive. The only difference was that it all ran together in a chaotic and fleeting way in my head that was almost unintelligible, but you get the idea. About 20 minutes into this, and I found myself pulling into the CarQuest parking lot without even realizing it. Now, as soon as I walked in, I was immediately struck by 2 things. The first thing was the 8-inch tall pompadour poking out from behind the computer to greet me. The second and almost simultaneous thing was the back end of a beautiful 60s era yacht of a vehicle that was parked on the side street and visible through the open door behind the counter. Hey man, what's up? The pompadour poked his face out from behind the counter, smiling and kind of half nodding, half bobbing his head as he said hello. It was a lot to take in. Here in front of me was this extremely friendly seeming Elvis-themed bobblehead welcoming me to the store, which would have been enough for me to stop and say, huh? Just on its own. But then there was this car that demanded all of my brain's power to process at the same time. I kind of vapor locked for a second, and when asked what I was there for, all I could muster up was a point of the finger and an awkwardly spewed, is that your car? That choppy half sentence would be my first utterance to a guy who would very quickly become a lifelong friend. His name is Travis Eubanks. Now, Travis wasn't shy about talking about his car. He had just gotten it back from being painted and having the upholstery done, and it was absolutely fucking stunning. It was, I found out, a 1968 Chrysler Newport, which sounds like a no big deal kind of car, and I agree in most cases. But this car was the exception. It had everything going for it. Stance, lines, everything. It was a couple inches off the ground and draped in a beautiful light blue, almost powder baby blue paint job. I'm not doing it justice right this moment, but it really had the look. It stopped you in your tracks and forced you to look at it. You did not have a choice. And I was in love. As a sidebar, I would eventually own that car about a year later enjoyed it thoroughly for about 4 years. But that car's a completely different story, and it does deserve having its story told. It really was a beautiful car. But anyway, Travis and I sat at the counter for about 45 minutes, talking about cars and life, girls and beer. Basically everything except the spark plug that I had originally gone in there to buy. Through our conversation, we figured out that we had very similar tastes in just about every topic previously noted. It seemed Travis had a Model A project too, and he was interested in seeing mine. A deal was struck. When he got off, he would head over to my place and check it out and shoot the shit. And 2 hours later, that beautiful blue Chrysler came rumbling up my street. By this time, the mower was a distant memory and tucked away in the far corner of my garage, making way for the Model A to take center stage in this cramped little one-car garage, if you can even call it that. As we stood there and drank, talked about the possibilities and our dreams, and all these stories began to be told. One story Travis had to tell was about an old man that lived just a few miles away who had 10 Ford Model A's in his garage. Now, skeptical but intrigued, I pressed him for more details. He said, "I don't know the dude's name, but I guess he's kind of a dick. I've seen some of the cars though, they do exist." He went on to tell me about how others had tried, but nothing was ever for sale with this guy. I knew right away I would have to take a look for myself. With darkness falling and beers quickly disappearing, I began making plans to check it out the next day. As I said goodbye to my new friend and exchanged phone numbers, my mind was racing with thoughts of what may be hiding just 2 neighborhoods over. The next day was an agonizing affair at work. I had been counting down the hours until I could go look for these Model A's since I walked in the door. As the minutes ticked by slowly, I began to wonder if my new buddy was full of shit. I mean, a guy with 10 Model A's in Northeast Portland in some neighborhood? Sounds made up to me. What a fucking fool I must have been to buy that shit. All these drunken tales some stranger had told me. Fuck. I was duped. What an idiot. But still, what if it were true? I better go check. As I started my drive home, I knew I'd be making a detour. And about 25 minutes later, I found myself following the half-assed directions that Travis had given me. And within 10 more minutes, I was stalking houses that fit the description of what I had been told. As luck would have it, I wouldn't have to look very far. About the 5th house that I drove by had an open garage door. The lights were mostly off, but in the doorway was an unmistakable silhouette, the back end of a Model A Coupe. I had found what I was looking for, and it was right where Travis had said it would be. And you motherfuckers doubted him. Finding the place, I would later find out, would be the easiest part of the adventure. You see, I had heard that this guy was strange, maybe even a little bit crazy. And it was said he didn't exactly love people stopping by. I knew that I had to approach it just the right way, so over the next several weeks, a ritual began. I would drive by every night on my way home from work. On the weekends, I would make several trips. Each time, slowing to see if the garage was open or if the owner were outside. It had to be just the right timing. I felt like I would probably only have one shot at this whole thing. After about 20 tries, the stars finally aligned. One evening, as I drove by, I encountered an open garage. This time, though, the lights were on, and a small, grimy, gray-haired man was shuffling around between two Model A's. This was it. I made my approach cautiously and optimistically. As I walked slowly up the driveway, just about to shout my first courtesy, "Hello!" into the unfamiliar garage, I was stopped in my tracks by an agitated voice asking, "What the fuck do you want?" It seemed every element of the story Travis had told me was holding true. I had to think quickly. I apologized for the intrusion and explained that I had noticed his cars from the street, and that I should stop by and thought I should stop by and say hello and introduce myself. And naturally, I was obviously a Model A buff myself. I mean, didn't he know that I too had a coupe? Shit. I just needed to get that out in the open, and he will surely change his tune. I was approximately 14 seconds into this explanation before he interrupted me, stating that I was making him late for dinner, which was waiting for him on the kitchen table. He wanted no part of talking about cars, his, mine, or otherwise. God damn it, his fucking pot pie was getting cold. In short, the first round went to him, but I wasn't willing to give up just yet. It would take several more attempts, each with pretty similar results, before I was able to make my way into the interior space of that garage. If I remember correctly, it was about a month of popping by before I was allowed the privilege of being halfway invited in. And even then, it was made very clear that I was not to touch anything, nor should I ask to buy anything. I agreed to his terms and made my way in. Once inside the garage, I found a 1931 Model A Coupe, a 1930 Model A Coupe with an adapted truck bed, and a 30 sedan. Okay, I thought, so where's the other 7? But as time went along, I found out that the garage had a shop behind it, full of cars. All of them were Model A's. There was also a row of 4 portable shelters in the backyard, each containing a Model A as well. By my estimation, there was probably more than 10 cars there, but I wasn't allowed to see into the shop at this point. In fact, I was only able to look into it once from the doorway in the dark. There were multiple cars in there, and from the looks of it, this is where the nicer ones lived. I noted a roadster and a sedan, both looking pretty much fully restored and much nicer than the cars that he kept up front. Now, one of the cars in the row of lean-tos out back was a 1931 Coupe. It was painted an almost John Deere green with black fenders. Now, he referred to it as being, quote, restored, but it was very clearly an amateur attempt at making a tired old car look presentable at best. Also, you'll note that I'm referring to him as he still. That would be because it would be 2 full months before he told me his name. It was Bob. As time went along, I began to get a little closer to Bob. On his terms, of course. His mood dictated to what level and when, but a friendship of sorts did seem to be forming. Now, don't get me wrong. He's a fucking prick. That part is non-negotiable. But once I learned how to navigate him, he began to open up just a little. But for about a year, I would stop by, offer to help with whatever he was tinkering on, and just bullshit with him. About half the time, he would be interested, and the other 50% of the time, he would literally tell me to get the fuck off of his property. It was a very strange situation to be sure, but I felt, making progress. It would be a full year of that before I would introduce the question of whether or not he might be willing to sell me one of his cars. I had sold that rough coupe body that I had mentioned in the meantime, hoping to buy something a little further along, and I had my eye on that green coupe at Bob's house. Now, as it turned out, that particular green 31 coupe that I had decided was my best target happened to be the one that Bob had owned the longest. Great, I thought. Surely he's attached to it. But, to my surprise, he actually turned out to be less attached to it than any of the others. Eventually, he would tell me one night that if he were to sell any of them, it would be that one. It was a start. Not exactly a commitment, but a start nonetheless. I waited another couple of weeks before bringing it up again, and it would be another 2 months of carefully presented inquiries before he would even consider naming a price. When he did, the price he gave me was fair, and I told him I would be back later that night with the cash. "No," he said. "I don't have the title here. It's in a safe deposit box at the bank. I'll go there on Friday. Come back Saturday and not before." Again, I agreed to his terms and hopped into my '68 Chrysler Newport. Yes, I owned the Chrysler Newport that Travis had by this point. But I left dreaming about the future hot rod that I would soon be driving home in just a few short days. I was elated. All my hard work and putting up with crusty old Bob and all of his bullshit had paid off. At least, that's the way it seemed. That Saturday, I went to Bob's with a pocket full of cash. I knocked on the door, which I had never done before, by the way. Until then, I had only stopped by if his garage door was open, which had turned into a sort of unspoken invite to stop by. But today was different. We had a deal, and I was there to buy my car. And I wasn't wasting any time waiting for Bob to open up his shop. I knocked once, then twice. Nobody opened the door. His truck was there, and I knew he was inside. Did he not hear me? Just as I raised my arm to knock for a third time, the door angrily swung open, revealing a very confused-looking Bob who was eating a piece of cornbread about the size of a brick, half of which was on his jacket, which was as filthy as ever. "How you doing, Bob?" I asked, grinning like a fucking chimp, eager to collect my prize. His reply was this: "I was doing just fine till you got here and banged on my goddamn door. What the fuck do you want?" Typical Bob fashion. I explained that I was there to pay him for the car and to take it home, as per our conversation a few days earlier. He stared at me blankly, and with cornbread falling out of his mouth, angrily told me that he was not going to sell me that fucking car. Why, you ask? Well, he had talked to some friends of his, and it should be noteworthy that I had never heard him speak of any other humans that he may know that he referred to as friends at all up until this moment. But anyway, he had spoken to some friends, and that those friends told him that that car was worth much more than the price he had mentioned and that we agreed on, and that some punk-ass kid was trying to get one over on him. And look, I'll be honest here, the initial price that he gave was fair, but there was no robbery taking place here. I asked if we could go in the shop and take a look at the car together, maybe revisit the deal, talk about some sort of a price that we could both agree on and something that would make sense. "Nope," he said. "It's not for sale. Go home. I have shit to do." Just like that, the door was shut on my dream of driving the Model A home. Of course, I wasn't about to drop it. I was willing to pay more, but I underestimated the games that I'd have to play to make this deal. Every visit, a different price. Sometimes it wasn't for sale, other times it was. It was an agonizing month of negotiations and games until it all blew up one afternoon. With a pocket full of cash and much more cash than we originally agreed on, after one last bait and switch from Bob on the day I was again supposed to buy my car, I fucking lost it on the old man. I said, "Take the fucking money, Bob. Take the fucking money, or I'll wait a month or so for the estate sale sign to show up, and I'll buy all this bullshit from your fucking widow." Now, full disclosure, I knew that was a shitty thing to say, but you need to understand how long this had been going on. It was truly ridiculous. And when put into context of the situation, I was actually taking it easy on this guy, at least in my opinion. Well, somehow, that was just the thing he needed to hear. Finally, after I don't even know how many hours invested into the hardest deal that I had ever made, he took the money. And finally, I hopped in my new car and drove it home. Bob agreed to follow me there and give me a ride back to pick up my car that I had driven there. That is, after he demanded that I give him gas money to do so. I lived literally a mile and a half, maybe 2 miles at the absolute most away from him. Anyway, I parked the car in the driveway, got into Bob's filthy old beater pickup, and spent the next 15 minutes on the scariest ride I had ever been on in my life, before or since. Now, I knew he didn't hear so well, but I found out right then and there that he was also most likely at least partially blind. I never thought I could be scared traveling through a neighborhood at 20 miles an hour, but he made it clear that it was possible. It was also obvious right then why every panel on his truck was dented. But somehow we made it back to his house. I got out of the truck, thanked him for selling me the car, and told him that I'd stop by in a couple days to check in on him and see what he was up to. His reply was to the point. He said, "I don't ever want to see you again. Get the fuck out of my driveway." It was a request that I fulfilled. I was done with crusty old Bob and his fucking mood swings. I never stopped in again. As I pulled away from Bob's house, I called Travis. I said, "I got the coupe. Get your ass over to my house and gawk at it with me." Approximately 14 seconds after pulling into my driveway, I hear tires screeching to a halt on the street, and a shocked-looking Travis came walking up, a case of beer in hand, shaking his head in amazement that I had finally sealed the deal with old Bob. "Holy shit," he said. Holy shit, indeed. I was proud of the achievement for sure. After countless hours of bullshit, there it sat. And for a few minutes, we just stared and repeated, "Holy shit." It was the first complete Model A either of us had ever owned. Prior to this car, we had both been perpetually attempting to piece together something slightly resembling a hot rod out of spare parts and rusty old junk. And now, we had a complete car to start with. It was almost surreal. And looking back, that seems like 1,000 years ago. It's almost comical to think of how long we had both struggled and jacked around with BS projects that neither one of us had the business starting at that point in our lives anyway. But this was different. It would be the beginning of what would truly accelerate our hot rod careers. About an hour later, Travis and I had the coupe stripped. All the fenders, running boards, bumpers, spare tires, all that shit came off as fast as we could turn the wrenches. Each piece that hit the ground making the car look that much better. Just before the sun began to set, we took turns driving the newly stripped down, quote, hot rod up and down the street in front of my house, laughing and high-fiving the entire time. Somewhere I have pictures of that afternoon, but I don't need them. I remember that day extremely well. It was the day I fell in love with early Fords. Okay, there you have it. Business and pleasure. Again, ironandsteel.com is the website. You can go there and check that story out for yourself. It's the first story I ever published on the site, so it's the furthest back. It's on the third page. And really, you can go there and read the ending of that story if you so choose, because what I just read was exactly half of the actual published story. So like I told you in the beginning, really long-winded story. I owned that car for a lot of years, so the story ended up super long. And yeah, I stopped where I did because it seemed like as good a spot as any, and I figured maybe I would record a second episode, part 2 or whatever, to go over the last half of the story. But I think instead I'll just paraphrase it here, and if you want, you can go read the actual long-winded version of that story and its ending on the website. So long story short, I owned that car for I don't know, probably 7 or 8 years. Took it to a guy, he chopped it halfway, and we had a falling out. So I drove it around for a year or two with the top just like tacked on. And then eventually another guy, Aaron Clyde, finished the chop for me, and eventually he painted the car fully. And so that's the version everybody kind of knows of that car, is the, you know, final finished out version with that paint, those colors that we picked out. It's just fucking a killer car with a great look, and I really loved it. And the only reason that I sold it was I had met Robbie Davis by this time, and he had offered a stall in his shop for he and I to build a race car so I could go drag racing. So the Willys pickup that is now the Hustler 3 popped up for sale, and in order to secure it, I had to sell something, and I sold that Model A Coupe. So that's how it went away. It changed hands 2 or 3 times, like immediately. I could have bought it back somewhere in the middle of that and didn't. And then most recently, the guy that owns it now and has owned it probably for 5 years or so, I've talked to him several times. I've tried to buy the car back in the last 2 or 3 years pretty aggressively, and he doesn't want to sell it, which is fine. It's his car. He can do what he wants with it. But yeah, I would like to own it again, but it seems to be increasingly less likely that that's ever going to happen. So he's put a flathead V8 in it, took the hood off, and to his credit, he's done a lot of work to it. But it is definitely not the same car that it was. So at some point in my life, maybe I will recreate that car and try to relive my glory days. So anyway, that's the very condensed version of the ending of that story. Again, you can go to ironandsteel.com and read the actual full story and all the details and stuff. I talk about the Estranged Car Club, which Travis and I started that club around this exact same time period that the story is centered around. So there's a lot of interesting sidebars in there if you want to go there and read it. And again, Trent Sherrill's photos, they're great. So yeah, worth a glance at the very least. So ironandsteel.com again. And while you're there, please hit the subscribe button and you'll be added to the list. I'll send you an email, maybe 2 a week, to let you know that there's new content. And that way you can be kept up to date. Things move pretty quickly. I'm doing like an article a week and, of course, this weekly podcast. So if you're on the site, you'll be or subscribed on the site, you'll be the first to know when there's new, fresh content. So, okay, that's all the time we have for this round. Again, thank you so much for being here, and I will talk to you guys again in exactly 7 days.